Okay, we're gonna call the meeting to order at this time, and Mr. Vogel, will you do a roll call?
Certainly,
It
Mr.
looks
Chair.
like we're limited.
Absolutely. Ms. Dawson, Ms. Dawson, Mr. Geffen.
Present.
All right. Mr. Irvin,
Present.
Ms. Kaser,
Present.
Judge Kulik, Mr. Page, Representative Robbins, Mr. Sandoval, Ms. Sherlock, Mr. Tatum, Mr. Chair, 3 of the 10 members are present. A quorum is unfortunately not present.
Thank you so much, Mr. Vogel. Because we don't have quorum, I don't think we're going to do the approval of meeting minutes. We're going to defer that to the next meeting. And maybe we'll even keep this one a little bit short today. We had planned on doing have some guest speakers, and I'm glad actually at this point that we don't, on brain science, specifically with juveniles. And I think due to the proximity of this meeting to the most recent one, it just didn't get lined up like we had wanted to. So we're going to push that back. We had at one point thought we might have a discussion today just on the exact language that we want to include or recommend from the subcommittee to the larger group that would be included in the March report. During our most recent full group discussion, it seemed pretty clear that we're not there yet on any specifics, and we're going to give a rather general response. Since we don't have quorum, I think we could just open up to have a discussion. If there are things anybody wants to be very specific about or not, does anybody have any input on that, even though we can't vote on it, but just to have a discussion? I don't blame you either. So I think we'll defer that. And I think with Mr. Vogel, I think the plan would be then maybe at this point to come up with some a rather broad recitation of where we are as a group that will be distributed. And then it would be open for discussion at our Dave, I think we've got another member joining. Oh, that was the best part of the meeting so far, Dave. So I think we would, I think I'll come up with something, and then any input we would want to circulate to everybody. And then if people have concerns, they can bring it up at the full meeting. We can have revisions made, and then we'll probably vote on something. But again, it's not going to be that specific. I think we're still figuring out really what the recommendations need to be based on some of this brain science, based on some of the recidivism data, and move forward from there. And then really the only other thing that we had sort of slated for today was moving forward. Are there issues? I mean, I confess this to Mr. Vogel that, I feel like maybe I've been driving the agenda too much on issues that we talk about, and I know that, I know Ms. Kaser, you and Ms. Sherlock have issues that are oftentimes truthfully outside the scope of my expertise, and want to ensure that we open up a dialogue about maybe ensuring that for an hour we have a discussion focused on what you all think are important questions moving forward. So with that, even with this limited group, are there issues that we should be addressing and researching and bringing back for this subcommittee that you think would be important? Yes, Mr. Urban.
So you had asked me when I talked about when somebody goes through treatment that the crimes attributed to them when they're in addiction maybe should be looked at differently. And you asked if there was any science to the length of time after they're out of their treatment program. And our clinical vice president, I went back and asked him. He's given me some information. At a future meeting, if you wanted, I could ask him to present it. Otherwise, I could forward this to Mr. Vogel, and because I know we have a lot of restrictions about what we can just pop up on the screen, but he does have a graph that shows success and continued abstinence. And there are specific periods of time at 1 year, 18 months, 3 years, and 5 years. Each is more predictive of success, ongoing success. And he talks about, he cites a couple of studies. One is by Harvard Medical School. And so if you'd like, I could invite him, or I could forward this and we can decide how to use it.
And Mr. Urban, do you think that when you say success, do you think success defined by not relapsing or not, or is it escaping the cycle of crime? Or how I mean, maybe the first step, Mr. Urban, would be if you're willing to share it with Mr. Vogel, and then we can look at it, because I think without a doubt, we want to bring a guest speaker in on that. And I want to kind of make that next step with the intersection with recidivism,
okay,
and safety, because I think that's the next step. I know they go hand in hand. But I think maybe we almost have two speakers that day. So I think it's a great idea.
Good. I will send this to Mr. Vogel.
Thank you very much. I think that's a great idea. And thank you for doing that and taking that initiative. I think that's really helpful.
Good.
And I appreciate it. Ms. Kaser, we're looking at you and Mr. Hanson. We're saying, what brilliant things will these people come up with?
And I see Miss Sherlock just joined. Perfect.
Oh man, that was timing, Miss Sherlock.
Maybe she also would have insight into, if we haven't touched on enough around certainly this area, or something we need to bring forward for further discussion. I think for me, it kind of crosses over with the remedies group. So I saw on our agenda, we wanted to maybe meet together with them. And I think that would be very helpful, because I think about that whole reconsideration appeal kind of process. And I think that's convoluted and complicated. And I think that there's room for improvement there, but certainly don't want to step on the toes of what that group is doing. Just because of our experiences, we're working through that process. And we do a lot of support for families when we're going through that process, and could definitely see some areas to improve.
And maybe with that, we should, if we can get a little bit more, I mean, I think getting through February 25th has always just been kind of like this hurdle. And then we get to take a breath, and maybe getting for all the subcommittees a few weeks or a few meetings ahead, and then distributing that to the other subcommittees so people can kind of, plug in and like, if there's a discussion on reconsideration, for example, Ms. Kaser, you and others who are interested in that can plug in and participate in that, even if you don't have voting rights, but you certainly could observe and listen and participate. What do you think of that, Mr. Vogel, trying to create a way that we're ahead of the game and more transparent with the other subcommittees?
Mr. Chair, I think that's an excellent idea. And I think that might be a great item to bring up in the future offline meetings of the subcommittee chairs.
All right. We'll call it the Kaser Amendment, and we're adopting it and moving it forward. Ms. Sherlock, what we were talking about before you logged on was just trying to figure out, are there other areas that we're missing? And certainly, the foster care stuff is near and dear to some people in this group, and just trying to come up with some other ideas. Other topics that we should be discussing that we just haven't. And certainly there's nothing, sacred about this moment, and we can always follow it up with an email. I usually think better when I'm driving home or, when I'm walking the dog. And so if that happens, we can revisit it. But, if there is something while you're sitting here today that you can think of, please let us know. It might make sense for us then. Oh, I apologize, Michelle.
I'm sorry, I was late. I couldn't find my mute button. I couldn't get to that screen. So sorry for my delay.
No worries.
Ms. Kaser was nice enough to meet with me yesterday to update me on some of the work this group has done while I was on vacation, and I so appreciate that. Just jumping, I'm not even sure if this is the right place to be talking about this. I agree. Ms. Kaser was talking about the convoluted process, and I'd love to simplify this to, to reduce the number of times we have to ask for variances, set asides, request for reconsideration, all that. But if not, then I feel like the process needs to be much quicker than it is. If we're going to make everybody go through this process for employment or for licensure, whatever we're doing, it really can't take a year to a year and a half to get through the process.
When you look at the process, Ms. Sherlock, I think of it as like these stages. Like you go through original background study and then you wait, and you either get the yes, no, or we need more time. Then if you get the it's all good, great, you're working. But if you get the no, or you get the need more time, you enter the limbo world. And that's, to me, is the period that I'm worried about. Do you agree with that? Or are you finding that it takes a really long time to get that initial decision?
100% I agree with what you just said. If it's no hits on the background study, I think those come back pretty quickly. Oh, and if nobody lived out of state for the last 5 years,
right? How dare you live out of state, right?
Quickly. But if there's any hit, and it doesn't even have to be what turns out to be a permanent DQ or a long-term DQ, if there's any hit, it's going to be a long process to even get back the first results. And then if you have to go down the road of the request for reconsideration and all that, then you're looking, the whole process is a year or more. And so, yes, I totally agree with you. And that's what I'm saying, like, can we simplify this process so we don't have so many of these cases going down that road? Can we eliminate the number of crimes that are DQs in the first place? Can we simplify it to just have some permanent DQs, and then like the federal level is, then they have a handful or two handfuls of 5 year DQs, and that's the end of that. But going back through this and trying to figure out what one state's crimes, how they equate to Minnesota crimes, and the preponderance of evidence business and all of that, just it is such a long process. And so that's what I'm saying. If we don't reduce this and simplify this process, which I think would help a lot, then I think we have to look at what kind of staffing does DHS need to get these done in a timely manner.
Yeah, and I have a lot of concerns with preponderance of evidence as an attorney. And I also feel that the department was really kind of put in a very terrible situation where when the legislature passed the preponderance of evidence, I mean, I don't really understand how they're supposed to, on a large scale, look at all of that. I mean, I just don't know how it's feasible. I mean, it would be nice if we could create a scenario where we simplified it and then opened up more resources in the department to, process the important cases in a timely manner. I think one of the hard parts is this artificial separation of the disqualification and the remedies group. There's just so much overlap. So I think we have to figure out a way to have a little bit more communication. And I think it gets easier after the 25th, where we've just been running so hard towards that date and getting something done. Because I agree, I think there are a lot of questions. I mean, time is a big one. I think, if you wait too long, it's just been my experience, those jobs are gone. The employers just don't have the ability to wait. And, certainly right now where there are not enough people working these jobs, people are just working their hardest to fill them. So I think that goes to the other things, like how do we integrate remedies and this group more? And maybe Mr. Vogel, and after the first of, maybe after the 1st of March, we set up a couple meetings where both groups talk about the issues that overlap. And so each of those other subcommittees can provide some insight and some recommendations, because I think that makes sense. Are other members in agreement with that or have other ideas?
I would be in agreement with that, Chair Geffen.
Yeah, the other option is join both. And I know that Ms. Dawson is on both, but you know, I'm not that masochistic. I'll do one. Is there, we have, I feel no compulsion to stay any longer than we need to today with this limited group. Are there any other issues that this group feels that we need to talk about today? Any questions or concerns moving forward? Yeah, Mr. Hanson.
Sure. Yeah. So just kind of jumping off on that POE discussion. So one thing that we've come across is the definition of serious maltreatment is maybe actually a little too confined and doesn't discuss financial exploitation as a disqualifier. And usually we use the POE to disqualify theft offenses or drug diversion. And so if we're going to amend that, that just kind of open up the discussion to make drug diversion a disqualifying offense, like in a maltreatment finding.
Okay. I mean, you know, the remedies group is tasked with the POE cases. We did get some data from DHS today on POE process that's going to be distributed. And I think a lot of us are really interested in what remedies is going to do with POE. So I think we can ask for a meeting where we say to remedies, can you give us an overview of what you're thinking with preponderance of evidence? Can you give us an overview of what you're thinking about with reconsideration timelines? And then I think we have to be prepared for them to do the same to us, but I think it could be a good meeting due to overlap. Unless, Ms. Kaser, yes, please.
I had a wondering, and I think this is maybe far down the future. So I preface with that is, you know, when we do get to the point where we're looking at the disqualifying crimes and maybe we are tying it back to risk of harm. I'm not an attorney, so how do I understand what the crime actually, how someone is charged with that kind of a crime? That's what I think about too, is how are we going to understand that information to really make an informed choice about like, well, does that really rise to a public safety issue or should it be eliminated or not? So just when we get to that point in the process, and I see that further down the road, but that might be something we have to consider is how do we look at
I think it's a good point. I think in my opinion, there's some low hanging fruit, like the fifth degree, the possession cases. I don't want to say consensus, but a 15-year disqualification for a straight possession of a controlled substance seems ridiculous. But then there are these other ones. And maybe, Ms. Kaser, a good idea would be to bring in both a prosecutor and a defense attorney to have a discussion about, we can provide the elements of the crime, but also some anecdotal information about what this actually looks like in real practice. I have issues always with the wrongfully obtaining public assistance. I find those to be poverty crimes and could probably should have been done differently as overpayments to DHS or the county. But I think there are some core ones that we'll want to look at. And, the hard part is there's just not everything's going to be the same. You can have two people with a theft and one you go, oh, that's a theft. And one you like, seriously? So, and some of it is, our process. If somebody goes in, if someone's charged with theft and they go into court at their first appearance and say, yeah, I did it, I'm going to own it, guilty, they're going to get a different sentence than somebody that hires an attorney, goes through the process, elongates it, and gets a deal. And so there is this part to our process that isn't exactly perfect. So even if you look at the elements between disorderly conduct and fifth degree assault, I defy anybody to really identify much of a difference. It's kind of the same thing. And then it might depend on the county, it might depend on the prosecutor, it might depend on what somebody ate for breakfast. But I think we can and should get a lot more information to people on that. I mean, I'm an attorney and I don't know the difference between half that crap. So let's get our group that information. It's a great point. Thank you. And here's our resident prosecutor, Mr. Page. He's logging in. We knew he was going to be a little tardy today. He had stuff going on. He'll be happy to know we're about to adjourn. Mr. Page, we didn't reach quorum. We don't have a presentation on brain science. And so we've just been having some informal discussions, quite honestly, about what we should be doing in our next meetings. Some of what we've talked about is more transparency between the other subcommittees, so we can attend some of those meetings that are of particular interest. And then Ms. Kaser had an idea where we might try to bring in a prosecutor and a defense attorney to have some discussion as we look to trim down the list of DQs to what those offenses really are. I'm sure you have a encyclopedia level understanding of all of them, but for the rest of us, we might need a little refresher. So that's sort of where we're at. We're not making any major decisions, no quorum, but just sort of having a discussion. And so certainly if there are any issues you'd like us to discuss moving forward, as always, love to hear it.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. No, that sounds like a prudent plan, and I apologize for being late. I was stuck in a previously scheduled court hearing, as I'm sure Mr. Vogel relayed to the chair.
He did, and we understood and appreciate you even giving us any time. But with that, I don't think we have any other business, and I'll give one last opening for anybody who has anything else to add. Otherwise, we can adjourn early and be productive in other things.
Sure, Geffen, is your email at Arneson and Geffen?
Not anymore. It's at it's john.geffen@mitchellhamlin.edu.
Okay, thanks.
Of course. Okay, with that, we're letting you off early. Don't overbill us for time. And thanks for everybody's continued investment and willingness to participate. Bye, everybody.